Hi, I'm Leah Lewis, and welcome to another edition of New Day, New Beginnings. Well, today we're going to talk about a subject that affects us all. And we're going to talk about why and how some things in our life have to change in order to make space or room for new things in our life to begin. And that's why my title for today is Necessary Endings for New Beginnings. Now, it could be any type of a ending of any type of or a beginning of anything. It could be a relationship, it could be income, it could be the family, it could be your health. Stuff changes all the time. Whether we like it or not, whether we understand it or not, that's not the issue. The issue is it is what it is. How do you handle it? So now I'll tell you, if it's something that pleases us, or we're saying, oh, well, that's good, then we're happy about it. But if it's something that doesn't please us, we say it's bad. But you know what? That's not necessarily true because a lot of times we don't even understand what's going on. That's not always the case just because it's not what we wanted or what we expected. But today we're going to look at the book of Ruth, a couple of different chapters, and we're going to see how many things had to end in order to make room for new beginnings. Okay, so let's go to the book of Ruth, and we're going to start right in chapter 1. Now, chapter 1 is going to tell you about Naomi. She's ending up being Ruth's mother in law. So now this is beginning before these things happen. Naomi was married to Elimelech. They had two sons. They lived in the country of Bethlehem, Judah. But there became a great famine in the land. So they had to leave. People were starving. There just wasn't enough of anything to go around. So they had to relocate. So they went to the country of Moab and they decided, well, we'll settle here. And they did. So they lived there in Moab, left everything they knew, everything that was familiar to them. They didn't have a choice. That was a necessary ending. Ending number 1 for Naomi. Then, after a few years there, her husband died. Ending number 2 for Naomi. So now it's just her and her 2 grown sons. And after a while, they got married, so they moved out and had their own families and so forth and so on. And they did that for 10 years in Moab. But then her sons died. First one died, then the other died. Now Naomi has nobody except the 2 wives, her 2 daughters in law. So that was another ending. Now there are no men in their families, just the 3 ladies, Naomi, Porah, and Ruth. So Naomi's left now with just her 2 daughters in law. So let's see. After that, they stayed there in Moab for a while. But then later on, Ruth heard through the grapevine, I'll say, that people were saying, oh, the Lord has visited his people in Judah in giving them bread. And that simply meant the famine's over. Judah is now regrowing itself. Everything's getting back to normal. The famine's gone. Yay, I can go back home. This was Naomi's thought because that was her home. So she told the girls, the famine's over. I want to go home. So, but the girls were saying, well, you know what? We'll go with you. We're not going to let you go back, even though it's your home country, everything that you're familiar with. We're not going to let you go back by yourself. So they said they would all go with her. But look what happened. After a while, they started heading back for Judah. Let's go to verse 8. This is Naomi telling the girls. She's saying, go return each to your mother's home. The Lord deal kindly with you, as you have dealt with the dead and with me. So she's telling the girls now, she's saying, you know what? You need to go back home where you're from, to your mother's house. Just go back. I can go forward by myself. You need to go home where you can remarry, have a family, live your normal life like you were used to, and I can go forward by myself. But by going with her, they were going to start a new beginning because it was a necessary ending that they all lost their husbands. But what happened after that? While they were, I'll say, on the road to going to Judah, because that's when Naomi told them to go back. But Orpah, she did. She kissed Ruth goodbye and she kissed Naomi goodbye, and she did. Orpah went back home. But look what Ruth did. Ruth stayed and said, I'm not leaving. Look at verse 16. Ruth said to Naomi, entreat me not to leave thee. And entreat means don't ask me, don't try to persuade me, just accept it. She says, don't ask me to leave you or to return after my sister. For where thou goest, I will go, and where thou lodgest, I will lodge. So wherever Ruth goes, or wherever Naomi goes, Ruth said, I'm going with you. Wherever you live, that's where I'll live. Thy people shall be my people, and thy God shall be my God. Wherever thou diest, will I die also, and there will I be buried. Now that's total dedication. Total dedication. She didn't care what was going on. She was not going to leave Naomi. That's a wonderful thing to have somebody that loyal to you. That's a wonderful thing to have somebody that dedicated. I wonder how dedicated you would be. What do you think? Okay, we'll move on. So it was just Ruth and Naomi that went forward into Bethlehem of Judah. Now let's go to chapter 2 because that's going to move us along. So now they got there. But when they got there, Ruth, she was saying, well, you know what? We got to get some food in here and, get set up. So she decided she was going to go to the field and glean. And to glean, that means to gather up the leftover wheat that the reapers left behind. So she's going behind them, just picking up, I'll say, scraps or whatever they missed in the field. But see, she was hoping that she would maybe glean in one of Boaz's fields, because she knew, Ruth had already told her, that she had kin from her husband in Judah. So she was thinking, if I could glean in his field, maybe I could win his favor. So a few days later, Boaz, he did go into his field. And he did see her, and he said to his servant, he said, well, who's that lady over there? And the servant said, oh, that's the Moab damsel that came here with Naomi. So he knew that he was related to Naomi. So the servant was saying, she asked me if she could glean, and I told her she could. And she's been here ever since this morning. So now let's go to chapter 2, and then let's read verse 8. Because now Boaz, now that he knows who she is, he's trying to, he's going to go over there and have a few words with her. So verse 8 says that Boaz, let's read it exactly. Then Boaz said unto Ruth, hearest thou not, my daughter? I guess that meant he was asking her, did you not know that I was related to Naomi? He says, did you not hear? He says, go. Don't go glean in another field. Don't go from here. Abide here, fast, right beside my maidens. Let thine eyes be on the field that they do reap. Keep your eyes on my field only, is what he's saying. And then don't go anywhere else. And I'll tell my men that they should not touch thee. That means don't say nothing to her. Let her do what she wants to do. And when you're thirsty, you go unto the vessels and drink of that which the young men have drawn. Because, back in those days, the women went to the well to draw the water. But he's telling her, you don't even have to do that, because he knew she was Naomi's daughter-in-law. So he's given her, this is just Boaz giving her the privilege of permission, his permission actually, to use his fields and the service of his men. And look at verse 10. She couldn't believe it. She fell on her face and she bowed herself to the ground, and she said unto him, why have I found grace in thine eyes, that thou should take knowledge of me, seeing that I am a stranger? She didn't even understand why he was being so kind to a stranger and asking about her. And look at verse 11. Boaz answered her and said unto her, it has fully been shown to me all that you have done unto your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, and how you have left thy father and thy mother and the land of your nativity, and you have come unto people which you knew not. Now, he's simply saying that's why he's favoring her. That's why he's favoring her, because of all she did. She gave up everything. She gave up her family. She gave up her home country. She gave up her religion, because the people of Moab, they had idols. They worshiped idols. Now she's in a whole new country. And like she told Ruth, your people are my people. Your God will be my God. She's willing to make that entire switch. So now he's saying that's why he was being so kind to her, because he was giving back the kindness that she had shown to Ruth. Now, these things we're seeing now, remember we talked about the hardships, the losses, the deaths. Now we see the new beginnings. They're beginning to unfold. Verse 12 says, this is still Boaz, the Lord recompensed thy work, and a full reward be given to you of the Lord God of Israel, whose wings you are under. So he's saying recompense means God's paying you back. A recompense is a payback for something good that you've done. It's a compensation. I'm returning the favor to you. He's saying you're being blessed by our God, the true God, the God of Judah. So for this, she thanked him. She thanked him for his comforting words. She thanked him because how kind he was to her. And she was surprised because he was so kind, even though she wasn't one of them. And in verse 14, it says, then he invited her to dinner. He invited her to come have dinner with him and his servants. And she did. And she sat with the servants. She didn't feel like an outsider because he didn't make her feel like an outsider. This was a new beginning for Ruth. Even though she gave up everything she was familiar with, that was an ending for her. But look what she's getting in return. And the next day, he told her that she could go and actually, go out there with the reapers. Now, where are we here? Let's see. So, okay. So the next day, that's when he told his men. Now I'm letting her come out here. Don't bother her. Don't say anything to her. Just let her reap like you do. He says, do not reproach. And reproach her means don't scold her. Don't say anything to her. And then verse 16, he says, and also let some handfuls of corn and grain, just drop handfuls for her and leave them there on purpose so that she can glean them. And don't turn her away. Do not rebuke her. That means don't turn her away. Let her do exactly what she is doing. So that made her have even more wheat to take home. And so it just says she went home and she had so much, an abundance of good stuff. And she showed it to Naomi, and Naomi's like, wow, where in the world did you get all that from? And she said, I got it from Boaz. How about that? I got it from Boaz. So look at verse 20. I'm in chapter 2. And Naomi said unto her, blessed be he of the Lord, who have not left off his kindness to the living and to the dead. That man is near of kin unto us, one of our next kinsmen. So now she's really explaining the relationship between Boaz and her, because Boaz, as you'll see, is his uncle. So now, verse 20, what we just read, she's saying, bless the Lord. She's talking about Boaz, who has, blessed be the Lord, who has not left off his kindness, not stopped anything. Boaz has given them kindness, not only to her and Ruth, but he's also paying respects to the dead husband of Ruth and his dead sons. So thanks to Boaz, now Ruth can go every day and glean with the men and his maidens. And she did that straight through the whole harvest season. These are all new beginnings. Remember the things that had to end before they got their new beginnings. Now I'm going to skip over to chapter 4. So anyway, as time went on, Boaz, he really began to like Ruth, and he went out there every day and so forth and so on. And he decided he wanted her for his wife. But the only thing was the custom. The custom was that the oldest relative of the deceased had the first option to buy any property, anything that belonged to them. They got first crack at it. That's why Naomi's husband had a brother named Neb, and Neb was Boaz's uncle. So that's where the problem came, because he got first choice of everything. And Boaz, if he didn't want it, then Boaz could have it because he's the only one left. But then it says, now Naomi, she had inherited lots and lots of land. She had a whole bunch of stuff, and she had land to sell. She had all kinds of stuff. She became a wealthy lady, really. So since Boaz had to give his uncle first option, the catch was the catch was in if you buy property of someone out of the country, you pay for it. But any physical person that was on that property, you have to buy them as well. So, and this was the one thing that Boaz was reminding his uncle of. He said, well, okay, you have first option, but I'm going to remind you that you'll have to buy Ruth as well. Now let's go to chapter 4, verse 5 and 6. So Boaz said, when you buy the field, you also have to buy Ruth, the Moab lady, the wife of the dead, because you have to do that in order to keep his name going, her husband, his name going, so generation after generation. But then his uncle, now he's the kinsman. Look at verse 6. He says, well, I can't do that. I can't redeem it for myself, because then I'll mar my own reputation. So, and he didn't want to do that, because he didn't want to look like he was buying a foreigner, and then he would have to marry her, and that would take away, he thought, from his as you said, it would mar his reputation and ruin his inheritance. I don't know how he figured that, but it didn't matter, because now he's scared to, he said, no, I don't want to do that. So now what's going to happen? So then the custom was anything concerning buying or selling or redeeming of anything of importance, it needed confirmation and it needed witnesses. And Boaz knew that. And he felt that, well, now that Uncle Neb don't want to buy it, because he didn't want to have to buy Ruth. So Boaz asked 10 elders to sit in among the people as witnesses. So that would be the agreement, to confirm the agreement. Now, this is what Uncle had to do. The man who should get it but doesn't want it, he has to take off his shoe and give it to his neighbor. Okay. Then once he takes off his shoe, that is like a testimony. This is and then let's read verse 8 and 8 to 10. Okay, so that's where Uncle Neb is saying, well, you buy it for yourself. So he drew off his shoe. And verse 9, Boaz says unto the elders and to all the people, you are witnesses this day that I have bought all that was Elimelech's and all that was Chalon's and Mahlon's of the hand of Naomi. That means I bought everything that belonged to her husband and both the girls' husbands. You all are witnesses to this. And the people all said, we are witnesses. So it ended up, that's how Boaz ended up getting Ruth and getting married. So Ruth and Boaz got married, and they had a son, and his name was Obed. And the women in the area, they came to Ruth and they said, look at verse 15. They said to her, he, meaning the baby, and he shall be unto thee a restorer of thy life and a nourisher of thine old age. For thy daughter-in-law who loves thee, he says, which is better than having 7 sons. She loved her so much. She said he's better than having seven sons. She has bore him. And Naomi took the child, laid it in her bosom, and became nurse unto it. Ah, what do you think about that? Now let's take a quick review. We got to do this kind of fast. But let's first of all, what had to end before all this good stuff could begin? First of all, Naomi, she had to leave Judah because of the famine, her and her husband and her boys. Then, after she moved, she lost her husband. Then, 10 years later, she lost both her sons. And then she ended up losing one of her daughter in laws. Of course, Orpah went back home. So she ended up with just Ruth. Those were the endings that had to happen for Naomi before she could move on to bigger and better things. Now, the endings for Ruth were the death of her husband as well. And she had to leave her whole family and her country and the true God that she was used to worshiping. The going to the true God, I should say, because in Moab, where Ruth and her family came from, they worship idols. So this was a whole new learning experience for Ruth. Now look at the new beginnings. Now they only had two or three really bad things happen, but let's look at what the good things were. For Naomi, the good thing was her family had to move to Moab to live. They didn't know that, but it was a good thing. The good thing was she ended up, even though she only had one daughter and all left, she still had somebody to be with her, to take care of her. She inherited all the wealth from her husband, property, everything he had. And now she has a grandson. She has an heir to her husband's name. And he gave her new life. The baby renewed her life. That's what the ladies were telling her. And she became his nurse. And she had a very comfortable lifestyle. And she could die happy and in her own home country. Now let's see what the new beginnings got for Ruth. Well, starting a new life with just her mother-in-law, that was a whole new beginning. Starting it in a whole new country of strangers, learning to work humbly to survive, learning to do what needed to be done to survive, giving up her own God, but she trusted and believed in Naomi's God, the true God. Meeting Boaz in the field, just what she hoped for, but she had to have a closing of another chapter to open up this one. Then getting married, that's a whole new thing too. And having a son. Now she becomes the mistress of the field instead of actually working in the field. So even though both of them had terrible hardships, losses, and heartache, they persevered. Now, Naomi knew she could go back to worshiping her own God and die in her homeland. And Ruth was so totally devoted to her, she learned a whole new way of life she didn't know about, and she learned to trust the true God. So they both trusted the path that God had set before them, but he couldn't do it until the previous chapters of their lives had been closed. And although closing chapters in your life may bring sorrow, the opening of new ones can bring much joy. You've got to give it a chance. Now, maybe some of you have doors that are closing and you don't quite understand why, but maybe it's necessary. It's a necessary ending for you to have a new beginning. And I just want you to read Proverbs 3 Verse 5 and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Read it over and over again. Memorize it. Commit it to memory. Stop trying to understand everything. That's not your job. Your job is to trust God. And my closing words for today are: don't let your yesterdays stand in the way of your today, because today only comes around once. Until next week, I'm Lelia Lewis. Thanks for joining me.